What's up, heroes, and welcome to episode 109 of the Producer Life podcast. I've got a couple of big announcements, so please hang around after the interview. Today I've got John Burke from Perfect Vocals Academy. John has been working in the music industry for 17 years and has experience in everything from being a touring musician to running a record studio to his current project of a remote mixing and mastering service with a specialization in vocals. He's also worked with Sean Giovanni, who you may remember from episodes 66 and 95. In this episode, John talks with us about finding his niche, his vocal mixing process, how to improve your home recordings, his go-to plugins, and a lot more. But first, cue the intro music.
This is the Producer Life Podcast with your host, the House Ninja. Bringing you actionable ideas to improve your music and get it heard.
All right, John, welcome to the Producer Life podcast.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm excited. This is going to be good. I've always struggled with mixing vocals, and so I'm looking forward to hearing some of your advice and tips and tricks. And I guess as I was thinking about how to begin the interview, I wanted to know, where did you get your early interest in audio engineering? How did you get to the point where you are today?
Well, honestly, I went to school a long time ago in Hollywood. I went to Musicians Institute, and I got a recording certificate there, and then I started recording at some studios in the Cleveland, Ohio area. I was doing a lot of bands. So I was working for a guy that had his own label. It was like an independent label called Standby Records. And he basically had a lot of bands coming through, and I was the head engineer. It kind of fell in my lap because I was interning for a guy, and then he ended up quitting like 2 months later. So I became a head engineer. I became a head engineer at this place, like literally right out of college. And I was recording bands for about 3 years straight, pretty much 60 hours a week for 3 hours straight. So, I mean, I got my feet wet quick in audio engineering.
You got soaked.
Yeah.
You just jumped in with both feet. That's
right.
Awesome. What a turn of luck.
Right. So, so I started out there, and then that guy ended up, I don't know, going a different direction. I guess he didn't want to pay his studio bills anymore. So some other studio kind of like took over. So I ended up making my own studio called Vibe Recording Studios. And so then I continued to record bands for another 3 to 5 years. And then the market kind of changed a little bit. And then I ended up doing a lot more for solo artists. So bands ended up kind of recording themselves more. So I wasn't getting as many bands, but then solo artists were just coming out of the woodwork. So that's kind of how I got to be the vocal guy, I guess you would say, is because, I'd get all these solo artists basically starting in like 2014, 15. I started just getting flooded with vocal work, people coming in with instrumentals, beat stems, and just wanting to do a bunch of vocal production. And so, now to this day, I'm still doing a lot of that. I get some band projects here and there, but still, I'm still doing a lot of recording artists, solo artists. So that's kind of how little background for you.
What do you think changed in the market where there were fewer bands interested in doing it? And I would think as a do-it-yourselfer, a band would be harder to record because you've got so many different microphones and so many different complexities of how to mic up a kick drum versus a snare versus a guitar. I would think that's a lot harder than recording for a solo artist. It kind of surprises me that the solo artists were coming out and the bands were doing it themselves.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that kind of made it that way is because a lot of the bands I worked with were kind of like hard rock or heavy or metal. So they weren't very like organic sounding bands. So a lot of those bands that I was already like, in my network kind of like started getting an interest for programming drums and recording guitars direct instead of miking up amps and stuff. So when people started, really getting into this, there's a guy named Joey Sturgis that like really took off as far as heavier music goes. And all his productions were like program drums and direct guitars and stuff. So once these bands started, just getting the software, sitting down in their space and programming drums and doing stuff. I think a lot of bands like doing it themselves because they're like, hey, I could do this and I could save money, just buy the software once. And so, I mean, if my network, I should say, was more organic bands, maybe like alternative or like indie or stuff like that, maybe it would have been slightly different, but a lot of the stuff I was working with was a little heavier. So.
Okay. And I understand we have a mutual friend with Sean Giovanni in Nashville.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So you worked at his studio for a little while and kind of got into the Nashville market also, and then moved back to Ohio.
Exactly. Yeah, I linked up with Sean. I hit up a bunch of different studios in Nashville when I moved down there, and Sean was somebody that got back to me, and I sat down with him, and he really liked the experience I had with solo artists, especially hip hop artists and stuff, because he gets a lot of hip hop and rap artists that come through there, especially in Nashville. There's not a lot of studios that are diverse like his.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of like, we kind of hit it off, and he gave me a shot, and, it went great, to be honest. Like
Yeah.
all the clients were very happy working with me, and they would even request working with me coming back. So it was a great time. And Sean, he has a great like philosophy as far as like how to look at the business in general. And it was nice seeing somebody, it was a great influence for me business wise to see somebody just really want to add value. I think so many guys just want to like collect money and just make it more about like just the job. But like he's very like in touch with being personable with people and like really adding value and making sure that that person is comfortable, which is huge. It taught me a lot.
Yeah, I think he's the only person that's been on my podcast twice, and I've learned a lot every time he's been on. One of the things that you said that reminded me about that relationship was, you called yourself the vocal guy. And one of the things that I remember Gio saying was that, you want to kind of find that niche where you can stand out. You can't just be a mix engineer anymore. You need to have some sort of a focus. So I find it really interesting that, you have sort of carved that niche out for yourself with Perfect Vocal Academy and, your focus on vocals, which is so critical to any mix.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I learned that a lot. I've listened to Graham Cochran a lot and stuff. I mean, so I definitely listen to certain people that really emphasize how important it is to really just find your strong points and rock with that, because yeah, when you try to wear too many hats, it doesn't really get you that far nowadays.
Yeah. So certainly for my listeners, you can help with mixing and mastering through Vibe Recording Studio. But then the other thing that you're really focusing on right now, which we talked about before the show, is Perfect Vocal Academy. And you're basically teaching producers how to do a better job getting their vocals to sit in a mix. Tell me about what you guys offer in terms of courses and kind of what your plans are with that.
Okay, yeah, for sure. So Perfect Vocals Academy started with just basically a YouTube channel and a blog back in 2019. And I've put out like well over 100 videos. Some of them started off to be just kind of me talking for like a minute. And then when I started realizing how valuable like tutorials were, like specifically tutorials between like 10 and 20 minutes, I've been putting out a lot more of that in the past year.
Mm-hmm.
People really seem to like that. So I put out tons and tons of info, and I didn't really start Perfect Vocals Academy to be, something really money related, but I did have a lot of requests from people about like a course, just something that would just be just a one-stop place to really dive in. So I did make a course called the Vocal Mixing Masterclass. And as you could tell with the title, it's literally all about like the ins and outs of vocal mixing. So I go over like editing vocals as far as timing, pitch correcting with Melodyne, pitch correcting with Autotune in graphic mode, compression, EQ. A lot of people are into, especially myself, into like dynamic EQ and multi-band compression. So there's full modules on that as well. So if I could tell you how how could I word this? It's basically a very modern approach to vocal mixing. You know, a lot of times you'll read like books and stuff like that, and it'll just kind of have outdated info. So I wanted to make something that's really the way that I mix to this current day and the way that I know a lot of other guys are mixing. So it's a very very current source
Okay.
of information. So
I know in my own production, I'm very Ableton Live centric, but you use Pro Tools. So for the things that you're offering both on YouTube and in your masterclass, how relevant is it for somebody that's using a different DAW?
I'd say really relevant because I think only 2 out of the 15 videos is like Pro Tools setup and hotkeys and stuff like that. The rest of it is all about mixing, so you could
Okay.
easily translate that to other programs.
Okay, great. So would you mind? Obviously, you've got, I forget how many hours it said, like 19 hours worth of videos or something insane like that with the masterclass. But could you briefly kind of walk us through from the moment you get a vocal stem to how you know, export a demo track back to the artist? Can you walk us through your basic process just to kind of give us an outline to go from?
Oh yeah, I'd love to. So basically, when somebody sends me something, first I load it into Pro Tools and I just listen to. I try to hear problems right off the bat because I a lot of times I already heard the song as for a song like musically, like when the artist sent it to me, they'll be like, check this out. So I listen to it, but then once I actually load it in, I'm just really listening for problems. A big problem that I stumble across is when people record from home, a lot of times they don't isolate well. So
Mm,
there's a lot of room in the mic, which can really cause some issues. But luckily, there are some plugins, like Isotope and different plugins that you can really strip it down some without losing too much quality. Um, so that's a big problem. Sometimes I'll ask them to re-record it at a studio, but if it's not too bad and I can make it work, then I'll just use plugins. But that's the first thing I'm listening to. I'm also
Are
um,
you, sorry, are you mostly talking about like background noise? And so, just gating out the background noise, or is it the echoes and reflections from the room because it's not treated
Yeah,
acoustically?
it's the echoes and reflections. So yeah, anything in between the vocals can be cut out with a gate, but it's mainly sometimes it's so bad that while they're singing or rapping, it's like you can hear the room and it adds like these bad resonances and stuff. So
Okay.
it can be hard, but I try to make it work, but like I said, sometimes I have to go over like, hey, re-record this, try this, and I'll just give some techniques of building a little DIY ISO, situation at their house. But and then second, what I'm really looking for is, I want to put everything on time. So immediately I'm finding out the tempo of the instrumental if they didn't give it to me already. And then I line everything up to the grid because I'm all about the grid. So once everything's lined up to the grid, I can kind of visually see where the vocals are at timing wise, and I can hear it as well. But it's nice to be able to see and hear it. And so I'll nudge things around. So then I nudge, and the reason I like to nudge is because it retains the natural flow. Because a lot of times if you go chopping things up and trimming and crossfading, sometimes the artist will get it back and be like, oh, that's not my flow. So I really tread lightly with timing editing. So nudging is a great way to do that. So it
What
keeps their
is,
flow.
yeah, so nudging in Ableton means something different than I think it means in Pro Tools. What does nudging mean in Pro Tools?
Oh yeah, just nudging the audio over. So you can like
Okay.
highlight like say like a full line or two, like 2 lines or something that flow all together, and then you can just separate that region and just kind of nudge it one way or the other. So a lot of times people rush it or they're way behind, so it's one of the two. It's more often rushing it than way behind. A lot of people rush the beat. So you would just like highlight that whole region and then just nudge it back, and you can kind of see where the peaks of the words will just start to line right up with the Pro Tools grid. So that's one of the first things I do before I even
Got it.
mix. It's just make sure that that's lined up.
Okay.
and then from there, it's all about pitch correction.
Mhm.
So a lot of times I stick with Melodyne because Melodyne has the least artifacts, but I do really love pitching in Autotune as well, for a really clean sound. But Melodyne really is super transparent and really little artifacts. So I'll usually Melodyne put Autotune like after Melodyne with like a kind of a slower retune speed, just so it's not like jerking the notes at all, but it'll be nice and smooth. And so it's kind of cleaning up anything that I may have missed with Melodyne. So
Okay. I guess in my head I had always put Melodyne and Autotune as synonymous, but I'm familiar with Melodyne. I know that's kind of an industry standard for tuning vocals, but Autotune is a separate program.
oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah, two completely different. So Autotune, there's Antares Autotune, so that's one company, and then you have Celemony Melodyne.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Yep. That's ringing a bell. Got it. And that makes sense that you would want to correct the pitch before you auto-tune it, because if you auto-tune, you're going to wind up with all sorts of strange artifacts if you don't have the pitch right in the first place.
Yeah, it'll just jerk the note to it. Like if somebody's a little too far off, it'll just take it to the wrong note, and then now it's like you're getting a revision back. Like, hey, I didn't sing that note. It might even be right in the key, but it's just not the note that they sang.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So you've got everything. You've got everything timed. You've got everything pitched. What's next after that?
Yeah. So after that, a lot of times I'm just listening for frequency problems. So a lot of times with vocals, and one of the biggest things I teach is multi-band compression, just because vocals, as they sing through a song and they're singing low notes, high notes, super high notes, all in between, the frequencies like change throughout. So there might be a small section that's like really muddy, it's like super muffled and just needs cleaned up. But then once it gets to some other notes, that problem goes away. So problems are kind of ever changing. So multi-band compression is usually one of my first things I go to. Sometimes I do some subtractive EQ first, but more often than not, I'm going for multi-band compression first. So I'm finding these certain ranges. So say if a vocal sounds muddy, I will take out a multi-band compressor and put it on that muddy region, and then I'll just adjust the threshold to where it's really kind of clamping down whenever it's a problem. And then when it's not a problem, maybe it's like some higher notes that aren't muddy, then it's not really doing anything. So I set it up to where it kind of works when it has to, if that
Right.
makes sense.
So why multi-band compression versus a dynamic EQ?
Honestly, they're very similar, but for some reason, multi-band compression just gets me there quicker. I don't know how to
Okay.
explain it. But dynamic EQ, I kind of use that more to pinpoint like specific frequencies. Like say I know that there's like a frequency of like 3K just like biting through here and there. Like I'll use a dynamic EQ, but where with the multi-band compressor, it's kind of like you can kind of hear tons of problems in a whole range. It's kind of more used as a broad way than it is like a narrow, but you can open up the Q on a dynamic EQ and use it similar. So you can literally get almost the same effect, but I have noticed that I like the workflow with a multi-band compressor more.
Okay. And in your videos, it looked like your favorite is C4.
That's right. Definitely.
Okay. All right. So you've got it compressed. So you've got your volume levels kind of equaled out, kind of smoothed out. And then what's next?
So I like to pretty much do effects last, like delays and reverbs and stuff. So next I would say, I'm doing things like de-essers, just to control the sibilance. I also play around with parallel processing. So I'll make like a stereo aux track and maybe throw like a tape saturation plugin or a compressor and just really send a portion of the signal from like say the main vocal. So I'll send out the send and then to this bus and then just turn it way down in the mix and just blend it. So I do a lot of parallel blending and it really does take things to the next level. And I have a whole video in my course going over parallel processing as well. And I think that's one of the more modern approaches that sometimes people miss is parallel processing. Like you could do it so many different ways. You can parallel EQ, parallel saturation, parallel multiband compression, parallel limit. I mean, they're all going to be slightly similar, but they're all options,
Okay. Is there a major, I've heard some artists talk about for parallel processing, just duplicating the track, turning the volume way down, adding the new effects they want, and then kind of gradually mixing that into the original. Is there any advantage or disadvantage to using a syn track or an aux track instead of duplicating the track and doing your parallel processing there?
No, I mean, ideally it's the same thing, but I guess when you're doing it with the actual audio, now you're just duplicating the audio, using up more storage. So I would say probably from a storage standpoint, your session would probably be a little smaller if you just used an aux track.
That's a fair point. I keep having to upgrade my hard drive, so that may be my problem. Too many tracks.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. All right. So, so the effects, and then after that, the effects and the parallel processing, is that kind of the last stop?
Sometimes the last stop is making like an all vocals bus, and I'll send like not only the audio, but even those parallel buses. I'll put all the outputs to go to just one place, so I can kind of control everything. Because sometimes if you don't do that, there might be a problem maybe in one of the parallel buses. Like for example, I use like Waves Doubler, like a doubling plugin sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when I add that, it'll sound good, but sometimes it might introduce like maybe some muddiness or like a problem that really wasn't there when I was mixing the main vocal. So when you send it all out of, all into one channel, now I can listen to everything as, everything all together and just be able to listen for any final problems, because problems will end up coming out late in the game when you're mixing. I mean, you can mix the whole time and then be about to bounce it and start to hear something. And it's easier to just have all the vocals and effects, parallel buses, everything just go to one place. And then once that's just in that one place, then I can just throw up an EQ or another multiband compressor or something and just fix that problem right at the end of the chain.
Okay. Are you referencing tracks throughout this, or have you gotten to the point where you don't need reference tracks, or what's your approach there?
Yeah, I don't reference too much. If I do reference, it might be in the mastering stage. So Isotope Ozone 9 has a nice feature where you can just load in a reference and you can kind of go back and forth. But I don't usually reference during mixing. I find it kind of kills the workflow a little bit. You end up going down certain paths and trying to get things. I like to do things more natural and just do things how I would do it, because it is an art form, mixing music. So I like to, use my artwork first. And then at the end of the day, I can always in the mastering stage, just listen. And if it's something I got to go back into the mix and do, like if say an artist really wants me to reference and wants it to be very similar, then I might go back to the mix and tweak some things. But a lot of times you can usually make it sound similar just with mastering alone, believe it or not.
Okay. Have you, in the mixing process, do you ever use Isotope's, not Mixtap. Those are the individual, that goes on the individual visual mixer. Have you ever tried their visual mixer?
Are you talking about their the mastering assistant, or are you talking about Match EQ?
No, it's this interesting. You drop it on your master track, visual mixer, and then as long as you have an instance of an Isotope plugin on each of your tracks, and that could be their lightweight Mixtap plugin. Basically, you do all of your mixing in this separate window, and it gives you sort of this crosshairs. So you've got, panning left, panning right, forward, backward. You can adjust width right in there. But one of the cool things about it is that you can snapshot different mixes. So you can tweak everything, adjust everything, hit snapshot, and then you can compare various mixes. Well, what happens if I push these snares back into the right? What happens if I bring the volume up here? And it's kind of cool. I didn't like it initially because it didn't copy over the names of the tracks. So if I wound up renaming tracks, it got really confusing really quickly, but they've fixed that. And so I've just started using it again, and it's really grown on me because the being able to see your mix in a 2D space is kind of cool. So I don't know.
That is cool. Yeah, I'll have to check that out. I don't think I've really heard of that. That's cool.
Yeah, Visual Mixer. I think it's actually free on their site. And it works and it communicates with all the iZotope plugins. So
Cool.
I guess speaking of plugins, you've mentioned iZotope a couple times. You've mentioned C4. Are there other plugins that are sort of your go-tos?
I've always used Waves plugins. I mean, I've been mixing since 2009, and like back then, obviously that they were the go-to. I
Mhm.
have used other, like when I worked at Geo's studio in Nashville. I really like the Fab Filter stuff. I don't currently use it, but the Fab Filter stuff is really, really nice and pristine.
I hear lots of
Universal,
people talk
yeah,
about
yeah.
Pro Q3.
Oh yeah, and I love the Pro MB. Their multi-band is crazy
Okay.
good. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's just a comfort thing for me. I've been using certain plugins for so long. I mean, obviously, I still use new plugins that like Waves comes out with and stuff. But I guess when a company kind of earns your trust over the years, it's kind of, I don't feel the need to really jump ship, and they're a little more affordable for sure than the other companies. So I mean, if it's not broke, I don't need
Yeah,
to upgrade. But
sure. Absolutely. I don't know that there's so much of an upgrade from Waves. I think so much of it comes down to, when your preferences and your workflow. And I think I gravitated towards iZotope products because at the time that I was getting started, they offer a student discount, which is like 50%. So that's huge. And Waves
nice.
did not. So for people that are students or teachers or in academia, iZotope is a whole lot more affordable. But like you said, once you get used to something, sometimes it's just not worth changing if it's not broken.
Right, right. And same goes for Pro Tools. That's why, a lot of people uh will ask me like, why do you still use Pro Tools? I've been using it since 2008. So it's just once you get so good with something and just so comfortable, it's really hard to make the switch. It's not saying you can't if you really needed to, but I rather just, not cross that bridge if I don't have to.
Okay. If somebody wants to send you a vocal stem to work on, or if somebody's recording a vocal stem, what are the important things that they do so that you've got good material to work with? Because I heard you say at the beginning of the interview that basically that's the first step, is making sure you've got a good recording. Because if you don't, you may have to send them back and say, well, you got to redo this. So what are a couple of key things that people can do to ensure they've got a good recording to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, isolation for sure is going to be number one. They sell things. You got like the chaotic eyeball, and they even sell on Amazon like those little shields. And I would say not only use a shield, but maybe drape like a blanket or put something above that, even so where there's no ceiling either.
Mhm.
Um,
I've heard
just
people
really,
use moving blankets as a cheap
yeah,
option.
yeah, anything like that. I mean, it's all about just testing it and trying it out. Like if it sounds good. Like I remember one time trying to do vocals in a closet, but it wasn't a big closet and it sounded really bad. So I'm like, no, so I'm not going to do that. So it's like, you know, I would say even treatment like RLX or something, you can go to Guitar Center, buy some RLX and just have a small room and just put it all over the walls. And as long as there's RLX in there, you're not really going to have too many issues. So
Okay, that's the acoustic foam that you can stick to your walls and your ceiling, and
yep.
um, okay. One of the things that I've got foam and I've got treatment on my walls, but one of the things that I have not done that I've heard some audio engineers recommend, and I'm curious if you've used it. There are some devices out there that they'll basically send you a microphone and some pieces of software, and then they use test tones, and it gives you some sort of a custom EQ curve that's supposed to give you a very flat response based on your specific room. And I was wondering if you have used any of those products or if you recommend them, or do you have any thoughts?
Yeah. No, I think it's a great idea. I mean, I've done so much like going back and forth over the years between like, listening to different playback systems and stuff. And I mean, I'm pretty confident with how the room's treated that I mix in, but yeah, it's definitely a nice thing to explore because, you know, it's just another thing to try. I think that's just what it comes down to when it comes to mixing music is like you have to try things, you have to try a lot of things and some things are going to work great. Some things aren't going to work so great, but it's definitely worth trying that out for sure.
Okay. What talk to me about kind of the back end of your business. So, a lot of the producers and DJs I'm talking to, they have their own websites, they've got their own mailing lists. I was looking at yours. It looks like you're using WordPress for your website. I know there's lots of options out there from Wix to Bandzoogle. What made you decide on WordPress?
Well, I started learning a lot about that type of stuff from Graham Cochran, his podcast, his business podcast, and he really recommended WordPress. I really liked it when I tried it out. It was just very. I think I intended on doing a lot of blogs when I first started off, even though I kind of fell
Hmm.
off with that. I'm more just YouTube now. But like as far as like if you plan on doing blogs, it's perfect. Like you
Yeah,
can download the app. You can just be sitting at a coffee shop on your phone, just blogging, and then it goes straight onto your site. And it's just very integrated for bloggers. And it's also just a really nice interface and layout, like, as far as editing the site. Very simple. The drawbacks I kind of have is it is very limited unless you pay the $397 per year. I do the tier before that. It's only like $100 a year. Um,
Hmm.
but if you do want the full experience, you do have to pay the I think they only do yearly. For so
Interesting.
if
What
yeah,
what is that? What does that open up for? Because I'm not familiar with that. What does that open up for you?
lots of different options. One of them I know for a fact was like, I think it was like embedded widgets and stuff like that. Like you couldn't do certain widgets and stuff. I
Hmm.
believe that was one of the drawbacks. I had to do
Okay.
some workarounds in some different areas, but um, some weird limits for sure. But yeah, if you know, I would just recommend the full one if you're going to be like doing a lot of stuff with it. My website's very simple, so I don't really have to do much like that. It's just very simple. I'm more focused on YouTube, but my website's just there to kind of put everything in one spot.
Yeah. I'm using WordPress, and I started off blogging much like you, and then went to podcasting mostly because, being a ninja, I don't like to show my face. So podcasting was a good option for me. But Blueberry, which is my podcast provider, has a plugin for WordPress, which basically makes it like publishing a blog entry, and that becomes a podcast. So it works really well. I like the fact that WordPress powers like 60 or 70% of the websites on the planet. So getting
Wow.
used to WordPress is, a good skill to have. One thing you might check out, I use a website builder called Elementor. I think it's like $60 a year, so a lot less than what you were talking about with upgrading WordPress, but it gives you the ability to do some amazing widgets, and it's all drag and drop and very simple to use. But Elementor is a fantastic plugin
Oh, cool.
for WordPress, so
Nice.
might be something to check out. Let's
Definitely.
see here. Looks like for your mailing list, you're using Mailchimp as your email service provider. There's lots of different options out there. What turned you on to Mailchimp, and how do you like it?
Oh, I really like Mailchimp. I mean, honestly, just the way it's set up is so user friendly. Again, I started using it just because Graham Cochran basically he recommended it just for people starting off. I mean, because it's free for I think
Mhm.
2,000 people.
500 maybe
No, I think it's 2,000 people
2000.
you can have on your mailing list. So you could send out to 2,000 max, and without having to pay. So it's
Yeah.
it's pretty good. So yeah, so I haven't reached 2,000 yet. So I'm definitely content with Mailchimp. So
Okay, good place to start. I'm going to have to check out Graham Cochran. I think you've mentioned him 3 times, so that's kind of my threshold.
oh
If somebody
man,
says something 3 times, I got to go check it out.
oh he's crazy. He's so well. He started the recording revolution on YouTube. So if you search anything recording or mixing, he's usually got a video on first page, I would say.
Oh,
He's been
okay.
around for about 10 years. And then a couple years back, or no, maybe 2018 or 19, he started a business, like a second business. So it's a business podcast. He actually just put out a book. It's on Amazon. So it's, yeah, definitely worth checking him out. He's a genius for sure.
Okay. One of the other things that interested me about sort of your marketing and your technical back end, anytime I go do anything, I always check out Google Maps and I look at the reviews of the businesses. So, Geo's, the recording shop, has fantastic reviews, and it is right there in Nashville. There's a bricks and mortar place. Your mixing studio is online, so you don't have a physical location, but I found it on Google Maps and it's just kind of got Ohio outlined. How and you've got great reviews as well, but there's no physical location on Google Maps. How did you do that?
Um, I had a guy working for me, just doing some outreach for clients, and he ended up bringing it up to me. He's just like, "Hey, you're not on Google for Google reviews." I'm like, "Yeah, I know. I don't want to put my house. I mix in a room in my house, and I'm like, I don't want to
Mhm.
just put my house." And then he's like, "Oh, you don't have to." I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" He's like, You can just not put your address." And I guess uh if you just select, because I think I put it under like music producer was like the thing that you pick, and then I think that, yeah, there's just a way to not have the address. So
Okay.
as soon as I figured that out, I was like, okay, cool. So I started moving all my reviews, because I used to have people do it on Facebook, but I just don't like that. Google reviews is so much better. So I started moving everybody over to that. Every time I do work for somebody, I'm like, hey, can you leave me a Google review? So, but yeah,
Yeah.
so far all 5 stars. So I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah. Yeah. You're doing really well. And I misspoke. It's not Ohio as a whole. It's kind of the Cleveland, Akron area. But yeah, there's
Yeah,
no, hey, here's where the guy lives. But yeah, that's cool. I'm gonna have to get on Google and figure out how to do that.
yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, so you've got your Vibe Recording Studio, you've got your Perfect Vocal Academy, and right now you've got your master class. Downloaded your 3 ebooks for joining your email list. So I'll make sure I got a link to that page on the show notes page. I think you've got 3 different books that you're offering right now: No Harsh Vocals, Massive Vocal Mix, and 7 Steps to Constructing Your Best Vocal Mix, all free,
Yeah.
which were good. They walk you through a lot of the basics, which is great. What's your plans after the master class? What's next for Perfect Vocal Academy?
I think eventually I want to offer kind of like a top tier package, to where somebody can like have one-on-ones with me, like over Zoom, to where they can bring their work to me, and I can just sit with them together, remotely, of course, and really just teach them what they could do. Because some people really like can take all the knowledge in and still be unsure. I've noticed that. So I think that would be what I would offer next. But for right now, it's going to be the course for a while. But I think that would be my next step, is to really offer that
Okay.
hands-on treatment
Yeah.
with people.
Or maybe you do a sort of a group coaching call. You offer like a premium package for
Yeah.
the
Mhm.
master class where it includes a weekly small group question and answer session. That might be
Absolutely. Yeah,
a
something like
logical
that.
add-on or something.
Mhm.
Okay.
Most
Okay, awesome.
definitely.
And I think you mentioned the program you were using for your course material. What was it again?
Thinkific. It's
Thinkific.
Thinkific. Yeah, thinkific.com, and another company that's, surprisingly free even to sell on,
Hmm.
which is crazy. I try to find things that are free, just to keep overhead down. I mean, if I have to pay for something, I will, but I'm cheap a lot of times when it comes to things. So
Yeah, I mean, if there's free options that are just as good as the expensive ones, why spend the extra dollars? So I totally get that. Totally get that. Okay, awesome. All right, and where can people find you online?
So you can go to my website, perfectvocalsacademy.com. I'm on YouTube, which is youtube.com/perfectvocalsacademy. I have a TikTok that's actually doing pretty well. I do little short snippets of knowledge here and there, which again it's all Perfect Vocals Academy across the board. So you could search it on pretty much any of those platforms.
Okay, terrific. Well, John, I really appreciate your time today, and you've dropped some great information, and I'm looking forward to diving a little more into some of the PDFs I downloaded and checking out some more of your YouTube videos.
Awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to let me on here.
All right, thanks, John.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I appreciate each and every one of you. I'll have all of John's links in the show notes page. Just head to producerlifepodcast.com and look for episode 109. A couple of announcements. First, I'm really excited to be performing at a 3-day camping Halloween festival next weekend, October 28 to 30 in Atlanta with Syndicate Presents. I'll have a link for tickets on the show notes page. This comes on the heels of performing for Beltline Cosplay's Comics vs. Manga Day Party last weekend at the Drunken Unicorn, which was an awesome experience, and you can see some photos of that on my Instagram feed at House Ninja Music. If you follow me on social media, you know that I've been spending a lot more time performing over the last year. You may also notice that I haven't released any new music in the last 7 months. I'm thrilled about performing more. But between my personal life and more post-pandemic performances, I'm having trouble balancing podcasting, producing, and performing. So I've made the difficult decision to put the Producer Life podcast on pause. This was a really hard decision for me. The show started almost 2 years ago during the pandemic and has 110 episodes if you count my 0 episode introduction. It has more than 15,000 streams across the globe, the vast majority of which people listen to 75% or more of the episode. I've had some amazing guests from Guinness Book of World Record holders to major label artists. I've learned a lot from each of my guests and really appreciate the time they spent with me. Despite all of that, my goal has always been to be a touring producer and DJ, not a podcaster. Podcasting was a means to an end, to learn more and to network. And I've loved sharing that journey with you all, so please keep up with me on social media at House Ninja Music or join my mailing list on the website houseninjamusic.com. But at least until I can work out more time in my schedule, I've got to hit pause on the podcast. All 110 episodes will remain available on my website if you'd like to go back and revisit any of them. And once again, thank you so much for listening. And don't forget to be somebody's hero today.